I never thought I'd be writing this post, but here we are. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I inherited my mother's house after she passed away from pancreatic cancer. The situation I'm in now is tearing my family apart, and I honestly don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore. When I was 8 years old, my mom took in a girl named Sarah through what was supposed to be a temporary foster arrangement. Sarah was 7 at the time, and her biological parents had just had their rights terminated. My mom had every intention of adopting her. She talked about it constantly, filled out preliminary paperwork, and we all just assumed it was going to happen. Sarah was going to be my official sister, and that was that. But life is a way of derailing even the best laid plans. When I was 10 and Sarah was 9, my dad got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Everything in our house changed overnight. Mom was suddenly juggling a full-time job, 2 kids, and a husband who was fighting for his life. The medical bills started piling up immediately. Dad was in and out of the hospital for treatments, surgeries, and complications. Mom was exhausted all the time, running between work, the hospital, and trying to keep some semblance of normalcy for Sarah and me. The adoption paperwork got pushed to the back burner. Mom would mention it occasionally. After Dad gets better, we'll finish Sarah's adoption. But there was always something more urgent demanding her attention. Dad's treatments, insurance fights, specialist appointments, experimental therapies that we couldn't really afford but felt like we had to try. My dad died when I was 12. I still remember the day clearly. It was a Tuesday in October, and the leaves were just starting to change colors. Mom completely fell apart after that. She'd been holding herself together for 2 years, being strong for all of us, and suddenly she just couldn't do it anymore. She was grieving, financially devastated, and trying to figure out how to raise 2 kids on her own. Sarah just stayed. There was never a formal decision about it. She was part of our family, period. The adoption paperwork sat in a folder somewhere, forgotten in the chaos of grief and survival. Sarah called my mom, Mom, and I called her my sister. Our extended family treated her like blood. When people asked, we just said we were siblings because it was easier than explaining the whole complicated situation. For 21 years, that's how we lived. Sarah grew up in our house, went to our schools, was part of every family holiday and vacation. She dated boys from our neighborhood, graduated from our high school, and stayed local for community college because she wanted to be close to home. When Mom started getting older and her health began declining, Sarah was the one who stepped up to help. About 4 years ago, Mom was diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure. Her doctor said she needed to be more careful about her diet and exercise, needed regular monitoring, needed help managing her medications. I was living about an hour away with my wife, building my career and trying to establish my own life. Sarah was right there, living in the house, working part-time at a local retail store. Without anyone asking her to, Sarah became Mom's primary caregiver. She took Mom to doctor appointments, helped her organize her medications, did the grocery shopping to make sure Mom was eating properly. When Mom had a minor stroke 2 years ago, Sarah was the one who found her, called the ambulance, and stayed with her in the hospital for 3 days straight. Sarah put her own life on hold to take care of our mother. She turned down job opportunities that would have required her to move away. She didn't pursue a 4-year degree because she was afraid to leave Mom alone. She barely dated because she felt like she needed to be available in case Mom needed her. Looking back, I can see how much she sacrificed, but at the time it just seemed natural. Sarah was there. She was capable, and Mom needed help. Then last year, Mom got sick again. Really sick. She'd been complaining about stomach pain and losing weight, but she kept insisting it was just stress or maybe an ulcer. Sarah finally convinced her to see a doctor in March. By the time they caught it, the pancreatic cancer had already spread. The doctors gave her 6 months to a year. She lasted 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks were a blur of hospitals and hospice care and family members flying in from out of state. Sarah never left Mom's side. She slept in uncomfortable hospital chairs, fed Mom ice chips when she couldn't keep anything else down, held her hand through the worst of the pain medication fog. I was there as much as I could be, but I had to keep working, had to maintain some income for my own family. Sarah just devoted herself completely to making sure Mom was comfortable and knew she was loved. During those final weeks, Mom talked constantly about updating her will. She'd had the same simple will for over a decade, everything to me, as her biological child and legal heir. But she kept saying she needed to call the lawyer, needed to make sure Sarah was included, needed to fix the fact that the adoption had never been finalized. Sarah would tell her not to worry about it, to focus on resting, that there would be time to deal with paperwork later. There wasn't time. Mom died on a Thursday morning in May, with Sarah and me both holding her hands. The funeral was beautiful. Sarah gave one of the eulogies, talking about how Mom had saved her life by taking her in, how Mom had shown her what unconditional love looked like. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Everyone kept telling Sarah and me how sorry they were for our loss, how proud Mom would have been of both her children, how strong our family bond was. It wasn't until 2 weeks after the funeral that I met with Mom's lawyer to go over the will. That's when the reality hit me. Legally, Sarah wasn't mentioned anywhere. The will was straightforward. I inherited the house, Mom's savings account, her car, and all her personal belongings. Everything. The house is worth about $280,000 in today's market. It's not a fortune, but it's not nothing either. Mom's savings account had about $15,000 left after we paid for the funeral and settled her final medical bills. The car is 12 years old, but runs well. Sarah has been living in the house her entire adult life. She pays what she can toward utilities, maybe $150 a month, but she's never paid rent because why would she? It was her home. She works part-time at a department store in the mall, making maybe $1,800 a month when she gets full hours. Her work history is spotty because whenever Mom needed her for a medical appointment or a hospital stay, Sarah would call out of work or leave early. For the first month after Mom died, I didn't bring up the inheritance situation. We were both grieving. Sarah was clearly devastated, and honestly, I was hoping we could figure out some kind of arrangement that would work for everyone. My wife and I talked about it constantly. We've been planning to start trying for kids, and we've been saving money for a bigger house in a better school district. The equity in Mom's house could make that dream a reality much sooner than we'd expected. But we also both cared about Sarah. I've considered her my sister for more than 20 years. My wife has known her for 8 years, since we started dating, and she's always treated Sarah like family too. We invited her to our wedding. She comes to our holiday celebrations. She's been part of our lives in every meaningful way. The problem is that Sarah doesn't seem to understand the financial realities of the situation. A month after Mom died, she started talking about our house and making plans for redecorating Mom's bedroom. She mentioned wanting to get a dog, something Mom had never allowed because of her allergies. She was talking like nothing had changed, like she was going to keep living there indefinitely. My wife started getting frustrated. She'd been patient and understanding during the immediate grief period, but she couldn't understand why Sarah seemed to assume she could just stay in the house forever. We put our own family plans on hold for months, first while Mom was sick and dying, then while we navigated the aftermath. My wife wanted to know when we were going to start moving forward with our own lives. 2 months after Mom died, I decided I needed to have a conversation with Sarah about the future. I chose a Saturday morning when we were both at the house, cleaning out Mom's closets. I tried to be as gentle as possible. Sarah, I said, we need to talk about what's going to happen with the house. She looked up from the pile of Mom's sweaters she was folding. What do you mean? I mean long term. You know that legally, I inherited the house. We need to figure out a plan for the future. I watched her face change as she realized what I was saying. The color drained from her cheeks, and she sat down heavily on Mom's bed. You want me to leave, she said quietly. I want us to figure out what makes sense for everyone, I replied. This is a big house, and you're here by yourself. Maybe it would be better for you to find an apartment, somewhere that's more manageable for your budget. I could help you with the moving expenses, help you find a nice place. Sarah started crying then, not just tearing up, full body sobs that shook her whole frame. This is my home, she said through the tears. This is the only home I've ever known. Mom always told me I'd have a place here as long as I needed it. She promised me that. I know she did, I said, and I meant it. Mom had said those words countless times over the years. But Mom also meant to update her will to include you, and that didn't happen. I have to work with the situation we actually have, not the situation we wish we had. So that's it? Sarah asked. 21 years of being part of this family, and now I'm just supposed to disappear because of a piece of paper? That hurt. It hurt because I could hear the pain in her voice, but also because it wasn't fair. I never wanted to be in this position. I didn't ask for Mom to die without updating her will. I didn't ask to be the sole heir to a situation that was going to hurt someone I cared about no matter what I decided. You're not disappearing, I told her. You'll always be my sister. That doesn't change. But we both need to be realistic about what we can afford and what makes sense for our futures. Over the following weeks, Sarah and I had several more conversations about the timeline. I tried to be reasonable. I gave her 90 days to find a new place and offered her $5,000 to help with moving expenses and security deposits. I offered to be a reference for apartments or jobs, to help her research neighborhoods, to do whatever I could to make the transition easier. But Sarah wasn't just sad about moving, she was angry. She accused me of never really considering her family, of just waiting for Mom to die so I could cash in on the inheritance. She said I was betraying everything our family had stood for, that I was being greedy and heartless. Those accusations stung because they weren't true. I love Sarah. I've never once thought of her as anything less than my sister. This wasn't about not caring about her. It was about trying to make practical decisions for everyone's future, including my own. The situation got worse when our extended family found out what was happening. My mom's sister, our Aunt Carol, called me furious after Sarah reached out to her crying. Aunt Carol told me I should be ashamed of myself, that I was betraying Mom's memory and abandoning the girl who had sacrificed everything to take care of her mother. She said Mom would be rolling over in her grave if she knew what I was doing. My cousins started getting involved too. They were posting things on Facebook about family loyalty and how quickly people forget where they come from. Mom's best friend sent me a long, emotional text message about how disappointed Mom would be, about how she'd trusted me to take care of Sarah. The family pressure was intense, but my wife was getting frustrated with my indecision. She pointed out that we'd been putting our own plans on hold for months, that we had our own family to think about, our own future to plan. She wasn't wrong. We've been trying to have a baby for 2 years, spending money on fertility treatments, hoping to buy a house in a better school district when we finally got pregnant. The equity in Mom's house could make all of that possible. You can't support Sarah forever, my wife said during one of our late-night conversations about the situation. She's 29 years old. At some point, she needs to figure out how to be independent. But every time I looked at Sarah, I saw that scared 7-year-old who had come to live with us all those years ago. I saw the teenager who had helped me through my dad's death and supported Mom through her grief. I saw the young woman who had put her own life on hold to take care of our dying mother, who had been there for every single medical appointment and sleepless night. 3 weeks before my 90-day deadline, Sarah asked for a family meeting. She wanted to sit down with my wife and me to discuss alternatives. She'd been thinking, she said, and she had some ideas for compromises. We met on a Sunday afternoon in Mom's living room. Our living room, I guess, though it still felt wrong to think of it that way. Sarah had prepared what was essentially a presentation. She'd researched rental prices in the area, calculated her expenses, and come up with a proposal. I want to pay you rent, she said, looking between my wife and me. I know I can't afford market rate right now, but I could pay you $600 a month to start, and then increase it as I find better work. You'd be my landlord. I'd be your tenant. It would be a business arrangement. I could see the hope in her eyes as she presented her idea. She clearly put a lot of thought into it, had tried to come up with numbers that might work for everyone. But I also knew it wasn't realistic. Sarah, I said gently, $600 a month wouldn't even cover the property taxes and insurance on this place. And honestly, I don't think you can afford even that much consistently. I'll get a better job, she said quickly. I've been applying places. I had an interview last week at an office downtown. If I get it, I'll be making more money. My wife leaned forward. What kind of office job? She asked. Receptionist, Sarah replied. It's only part-time to start, but they said there might be opportunities to move up. I felt my heart sink. A part-time receptionist job wasn't going to be enough for Sarah to afford market rate rent anywhere, let alone in the house she'd grown up in. And even if it was, my wife and I would still be stuck in our current living situation, still unable to move forward with our own plans. I appreciate that you're trying to find solutions, I told Sarah, but I don't think the rental arrangement is going to work. My wife and I need to think about our own future too. We want to start a family, and we need the financial resources to do that responsibly. Sarah's face crumpled. So my 21 years here don't matter at all? She asked. All the time I spent taking care of Mom, all the sacrifices I made, none of that means anything? Of course it means something, I said. It means everything. But I can't change the legal reality of the situation. Mom didn't include you in the will, and I have to work with the circumstances I've inherited. The conversation ended with Sarah storming out of the room and locking herself in her bedroom. I could hear her crying through the door, and it broke my heart. But I also felt like I was trapped between impossible choices: disappoint Sarah and face the wrath of my extended family, or sacrifice my own family's future to maintain a status quo that wasn't sustainable anyway. Over the following days, Sarah barely spoke to me. She'd leave for work early and come home late, clearly trying to avoid interactions. When we did cross paths in the house, she'd look at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was someone who had betrayed her trust in the deepest possible way. A week before my original 90-day deadline, Sarah came to me with another proposal. She'd been talking to some of her friends, she said, and she thought she might be able to find roommates to help split the rent if I'd let her stay. 2 of her coworkers were looking for a place, and together they could probably afford $800 or $900 a month. Again, I had to explain why that wouldn't work. The house needed maintenance that I couldn't afford to keep up with if I wasn't living there or getting market rate rent. The property taxes alone were over $3,000 a year. My wife and I needed to either sell the house and use the equity for our own family's future, or move into it ourselves and rent out our current place for additional income. You've made up your mind, Sarah said flatly. You don't want me here, and you're going to come up with reasons why none of my solutions will work. That's not true, I protested. I'm trying to be realistic about what's financially viable for everyone involved. Everyone involved, she repeated. Right, everyone except me. The bitterness in her voice was like a knife. I knew she was hurting, knew she felt abandoned and betrayed. But I also felt like she wasn't being fair to me. I hadn't asked to be put in this position. I was trying to balance my love for her with my responsibilities to my own family, and there didn't seem to be any solution that would make everyone happy. As the deadline approached, I started getting pressure from other directions too. My wife's patience was running out completely. She'd been supportive and understanding for months, but she was tired of feeling like our life was on hold indefinitely. She wanted to know when we were going to start making decisions based on our own family's needs instead of constantly trying to manage Sarah's emotions. I love Sarah too, she told me one night, but we can't sacrifice our entire future because she's struggling to accept reality. She's had 3 months to start figuring out her next steps, and instead she's spent that time trying to convince you to let her stay forever. My wife wasn't wrong. Sarah had spent more energy trying to find ways to remain in the house than she had preparing for the transition to somewhere new. She'd applied for a few jobs, but hadn't really thrown herself into the search. She'd looked at a couple of apartments online, but hadn't actually visited any in person. On the other hand, I could understand why she was struggling. This wasn't just about finding a new place to live. This was about losing the only home she'd ever known, leaving behind the neighborhood where she had friends and connections, starting over completely at 29 years old with limited resources and no family support system. The night before my original deadline, I made a decision. I went to Sarah's room and knocked on the door. Can we talk? I asked. She let me in, and I sat on the edge of her bed like I had so many times when we were kids, and she was upset about something. I'm going to give you an extension, I said. 6 more months. But Sarah, I need you to use that time productively. I need you to really commit to finding a job with better pay and looking for a place you can afford. I'll help you however I can, but you have to meet me halfway. Sarah threw her arms around me and started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. I promise I'll find something. I'll make this work. For a moment, sitting there in the bedroom where Sarah had lived since she was 7 years old, I felt like maybe I'd made the right choice. Maybe 6 months would be enough time for her to get on her feet. Maybe we could find a solution that worked for everyone. But when I told my wife about the extension, her reaction was not what I'd hoped for. 6 more months? She said. We're supposed to put our lives on hold for another 6 months while Sarah figures out what every other adult in America has to figure out: how to support themselves. She's not every other adult, I replied. She's family, and she's been through a lot. She's been through a lot, but so have we, my wife shot back. We've been dealing with your mom's illness, her death, this whole inheritance mess, and now we're supposed to wait another 6 months before we can start planning our own family? That fight was one of the worst my wife and I had ever had. She accused me of prioritizing Sarah's comfort over our marriage and our future children. I accused her of being heartless and unsympathetic to someone who was essentially my sister. We both said things we didn't mean, and we ended up sleeping in separate rooms that night. The next morning, my wife apologized for some of the things she'd said, but she maintained her position on the timeline. I understand that this is hard for you, she said, but I need to know that you're committed to our family's future, not just to managing Sarah's feelings indefinitely. Over the following weeks, I watched Sarah carefully to see if she was really making an effort to change her situation. The results were mixed. She did get the part-time receptionist job she'd interviewed for, which was a step in the right direction. But it was only 20 hours a week at $12 an hour, which meant she'd be making less than $1,000 a month before taxes. She also started looking at apartments, but she was clearly discouraged by what she found. Anything she could afford was in a rough neighborhood or was tiny and run down. The nicer places required proof of income that was 3 times the monthly rent, which ruled out almost everything in her price range. I can't live in these places, she told me after a particularly discouraging day of apartment hunting. They're dangerous, or they're falling apart, or they're so far from everything I need a car just to buy groceries. I felt for her, I really did. But I was also starting to understand what my wife had been trying to tell me. Sarah wasn't just looking for housing. She was looking for someone else to solve her problems for her. Every obstacle she encountered became a reason why she couldn't move out rather than a challenge to overcome. 2 months into the extension period, Sarah came to me with news that changed everything. She'd been talking to a legal aid attorney about her situation, she said, and the lawyer thought she might have grounds to claim part of the inheritance. What kind of grounds? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Well, I lived in the house for over 20 years, she explained. And Mom always said she was going to include me in the will. The lawyer thinks that might count as an oral contract or something. Plus, I provided care for Mom for years without being paid for it. I felt my stomach drop. The idea that this could become a legal battle hadn't really occurred to me before. Sarah, are you seriously thinking about suing me? I don't want to sue you, she said quickly. I just want what's fair. The lawyer said I might be entitled to at least part of the house value, or the right to keep living there. That night, I called my own attorney, the same one who had handled Mom's estate. He listened to the situation and gave me advice I didn't want to hear. She might have a case, he said. It's not a slam dunk, but given the length of time she lived there, her role as caregiver, and your mother's stated intentions to include her in the will, a judge might find that she has an equitable claim to at least part of the estate. What does that mean in practical terms? I asked. It means this could get expensive and ugly fast, he replied. Even if you ultimately win, you'll spend thousands on legal fees. And if you lose, you could end up having to sell the house and split the proceeds with her or give her some kind of permanent right to live there. I hung up the phone feeling sick. The situation was spiraling completely out of my control. What had started as a difficult family conversation was turning into a potential legal nightmare that could destroy relationships and cost everyone involved more than we could afford. The next few weeks were tense. Sarah and I barely spoke, and when we did, there was an undercurrent of legal threat that made every interaction feel hostile. She'd moved from asking for my help to researching her rights, and I'd moved from trying to be understanding to protecting my own interests. My wife was furious about the legal consultation. So now she's threatening to sue us, she said. After everything we've tried to do to help her, she says she doesn't want to sue. I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. She just wants to understand her options. Her options, my wife repeated, right? Well, maybe it's time for us to understand our options too. Maybe we should be talking to a lawyer about how to get her out of the house as quickly as possible. I didn't want it to come to that, but I was starting to realize that my attempts to be generous and understanding might have actually made the situation worse. By giving Sarah the extension, by continuing to treat this as a family matter rather than a legal one, I might have inadvertently strengthened her position if she did decide to fight for the house. 4 months into the extension, Sarah still hadn't found a place to move or significantly improved her employment situation. She was working the part-time receptionist job, but she'd also started calling out frequently. She said she was too stressed and depressed to focus on work. Her supervisor had already talked to her twice about her attendance. Meanwhile, my wife and I were stuck in limbo. We couldn't sell the house with Sarah living there and potentially preparing to file a legal claim. We couldn't move into it ourselves because Sarah was still there and the situation was too hostile. We couldn't move forward with our family planning because our financial future was completely uncertain. One evening in November, about 5 months into the extension period, Sarah and I had what would turn out to be our last real conversation about the situation. "I've been thinking," she said, "and I want you to know that I understand why you're in a difficult position." I felt a moment of hope that maybe we were finally going to find some middle ground. "But I also need you to understand my position," she continued. "This house isn't just a financial asset to me. It's my home. It's where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I did homework at the kitchen table, where I took care of Mom when she was dying. Every room has memories. Every corner has meaning." "I understand that," I said. "I have those same memories. This is my childhood home too." "But you have other options," she replied. "You have your wife, your own house, your career, your plans for the future. You have a whole life outside of this place. This is all I have." And that was when I realized that Sarah and I were never going to agree on this situation. From her perspective, I was taking away her entire world to add to a life that was already full and successful. From my perspective, I was trying to balance my love for her with my responsibilities to my own family, working within the constraints of a legal and financial reality I hadn't chosen. "Sarah," I said carefully, "what if we sold the house and split the proceeds? You'd have enough money to buy a small place of your own, maybe a condo or a townhouse. You'd have your own home, your own equity." She shook her head immediately. "I can't afford the maintenance on a place by myself. I can't afford property taxes or homeowner's insurance. And besides, I don't want to live somewhere else. I want to live here." "But that's not sustainable," I said, feeling my frustration rise. "You can't afford to maintain this place either. Even if I gave you the whole house, you'd end up losing it to foreclosure within a couple of years. So let me worry about that," she replied. "Let me try. And when you fail, then what? Then you've lost everything. And I've given up my family's financial security for nothing." The conversation ended the same way they all did, with Sarah feeling like I was being heartless and practical, and me feeling like she was being unrealistic and unfair. A week later, I got a call from my attorney. Sarah had filed papers with the probate court challenging the will and claiming an equitable interest in the estate. The legal battle I'd been dreading was officially underway. The lawsuit changed everything. Sarah and I stopped talking almost entirely. My wife was furious and wanted to fight aggressively to get Sarah out of the house as quickly as possible. My extended family was split. Some supported Sarah's right to fight for what they saw as her fair share. Others thought she was being greedy and ungrateful. My lawyer explained that the case could take months or even years to resolve. In the meantime, Sarah had the right to continue living in the house, and I couldn't sell it or make any major decisions about it. We were all stuck in an expensive, emotionally draining legal limbo. The financial stress was enormous. Legal fees started piling up immediately. $500 for the initial consultation, $1,500 for the response to Sarah's filing, $300 an hour for ongoing representation. My wife and I had to take out a loan against our current house just to pay for the attorney. The emotional stress was even worse. Sarah and I were living in the same house, but essentially acting like enemies. She'd hired her own lawyer through legal aid, and suddenly every conversation had to go through attorneys. The woman I consider my sister for over 20 years had become a legal adversary. 6 months after Sarah filed the lawsuit, we finally had our day in court. The hearing was supposed to be about whether Sarah had standing to challenge the will, but it ended up being about 20 years of family history, unfinished adoption paperwork, caregiving responsibilities, and moral obligations versus legal realities. Sarah's lawyer argued that she had provided valuable services to my mother for years without compensation, that my mother had repeatedly promised to include her in the will, and that I would be unjustly enriched if I kept the entire inheritance, while she received nothing. My lawyer argued that feelings and promises don't override legal documents, that my mother had years to update her will and chose not to, and that I had no legal obligation to share an inheritance I'd received through proper legal channels. The judge listened to both sides and asked probing questions about the family dynamics, the caregiving arrangements, and my mother's stated intentions. At the end of the hearing, she said she needed time to review the case law and would issue a written decision within 30 days. Those 30 days were some of the longest of my life. Sarah and I were still living in the same house, but we might as well have been strangers. The legal battle had destroyed whatever family relationship we'd had left. Even if I won the case, I knew our relationship would never recover. When the decision finally came, it was a partial victory for both sides, which meant it was really a loss for everyone involved. The judge ruled that Sarah didn't have grounds to claim ownership of the house or a right to live there permanently. But she also ruled that Sarah was entitled to compensation for the unpaid caregiving services she provided to my mother, particularly during the final 2 years when Mom's care needs had been most intensive. The compensation amount was $50,000, to be paid either in cash or through Sarah receiving a proportional share of the house sale proceeds. I didn't have $50,000 in cash. My wife and I had already spent our savings on legal fees and living expenses during the months-long legal battle. The only way to pay Sarah was to sell the house and give her share of the proceeds. So that's what we did. The house sold for $270,000 after realtor fees and closing costs. Sarah got her $50,000. I got the remaining $220,000 minus the $15,000 I'd already spent on legal fees. Sarah used her money to put a down payment on a small condo about 30 minutes away from our old neighborhood. It's a nice enough place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small patio. She seems to be managing the mortgage payments with her current job, though I know money is tight. I used my portion of the money as a down payment on a larger house in the school district my wife and I had been hoping for. We finally got pregnant last month, and we're expecting our first child in the spring. But I can't shake the feeling that everyone lost in this situation. Sarah got some money, but she lost the home she'd lived in for over 20 years and the family relationships that had sustained her throughout her life. I got the financial resources my wife and I needed, but I lost my sister and destroyed the family unity that my mother had been so proud of. We don't talk anymore. Sarah didn't invite us to her housewarming party, and we didn't invite her to our pregnancy announcement dinner. My extended family is still split. Some people think I did the right thing by standing up for my legal rights. Others think I should have found a way to share the inheritance voluntarily before it came to lawyers and lawsuits. Looking back, I wonder if there was a different path we could have taken. Maybe if I'd offered to split the inheritance 50-50 from the beginning, we could have avoided the legal battle and preserved our relationship. Maybe if Sarah had been more realistic about her financial situation and more willing to compromise, we could have found a solution that worked for everyone. But I also think about my wife and our future children. We're in a good position now to provide for our family, to give our kids the stability and opportunities that Sarah and I didn't always have growing up. That has to count for something, right? I still love Sarah. I still think of her as my sister, even though we don't speak. I hope she's happy in her new place. I hope her life gets easier. I hope she finds someone to share it with. But I also can't regret fighting for my family's financial security, even if it cost me a relationship that had meant everything to me for most of my life. Sometimes I think about what my mom would say about how everything turned out. Would she be proud that I stood up for my own family's needs? Would she be disappointed that I couldn't find a way to take care of Sarah too? Would she be heartbroken that the 2 kids she raised ended up as strangers? I'll probably never know the answers to those questions. All I know is that I'm 32 years old, expecting my first child, living in a house I can afford because of an inheritance that tore my family apart. And somewhere across town, the woman who used to be my sister is starting over in a place she never wanted to live, with money she had to fight me in court to get. I don't know if I'm the asshole in this situation. I know I followed the law. I know I provided for my family's future. I know I offered Sarah more help than I was legally obligated to give. But I also know that a family that used to be close and loving is now fractured beyond repair, and that has to be at least partly my fault. So there's the whole story. Make of it what you will.